Dear learners, in this lecture, we shall be continuing with our discussion on the kinds of companies which can be formed under the company law. I shall be taking up the third part of this topic under this lecture. So, just to recollect and recap our discussion on the various kinds of companies. A company is a business organization. So all the companies that we are discussing under this head are also various kinds of business organizations. So it depends upon the promoter or the entrepreneur as to what kind of business organization suits their business the most, depending upon its structure, features, and the legal framework. So, continuing with our discussion on the kinds of company, in this part 3 lecture, I would be discussing the companies which fall under these two heads, namely control and access to capital. Here, I would be taking up their concepts, features, structure, points of differentiation, along with the provisions governing them under the company law. So taking up the classification of control first, this is the fifth classification that we are taking up. Now under this classification head, we have three kinds of companies, namely a holding company, a subsidiary company, and an associate company. Before we begin on the description of these three kinds of companies, it is to be noted that the words holding, subsidiary, and associate, they are comparative and relative terms. This means that they are used in relation to other terms. So a holding company has a relation to another company that is known as a subsidiary company. Similarly, a subsidiary company has a relation to another company known as a holding company. Likewise, an associate company has a relation to another company with which it is associated. So, taking up a holding company first, a holding company is defined under Section 2, Subclause 46 of the Companies Act 2013. According to this provision, a holding company in relation to one or more other companies means a company of which such companies are subsidiary companies. Now, to simplify this definition, a holding company is regarded as a parent or a dominating company over which it exercises control over another company, which is known as a subsidiary company. Now, a subsidiary company is a company that is defined under Section 2, Subclause 87 of the Companies Act. According to this provision, a subsidiary company or simply a subsidiary in relation to another company, that is to say the holding company, means a company in which the holding company, number one, exercises control over the composition of the board of directors or exercises or controls more than one half of the total voting power either at its own or together with one or more of its subsidiary companies. Now, to simplify this rather long definition, to simply put, a subsidiary company is regarded as an offspring company over which control is exercised by parent or holding company. Then moving on to an associate company. An associate company is defined under Section 2, Subclause 6 of the Companies Act 2013. According to this provision, an associate company in relation to another company means a company in which that other company has a significant influence, but which is not a subsidiary company of the company having such influence and includes a joint venture company. So, as you would acknowledge, this is a very technically worded definition, but to simplify it for the benefit of our learners, an associate company is regarded as a company over which another company has got significant influence, but not control, as in case of a holding company. So, the significant influence in an associate company is not to such an extent, intensity, or magnitude that it becomes a subsidiary of another company, but it is only categorized as being associated with another company. So, as you must have noted, the keywords in this kind of classification of company are the words control and the word significant influence, which have been highlighted in bold for your reference. Now we shall be looking at the meaning and application of these words in the context of holding, subsidiary and associate companies. First, let us analyze the word control. It is defined under Section 2, Subclause 27 of the Companies Act 2013. According to this provision, the word control shall include the right to appoint majority of the directors or control the management or policy decisions exercisable by a person or persons, whether acting individually or in concert, directly or indirectly, including by virtue of their shareholding or management rights or shareholder agreements or voting agreements or in any other manner. So as you would have experienced, again, this is a very technically worded, heavy definition with a lot of legal jargon. To simplify this for the benefit of our learners, control has essentially two dimensions. First, the right to appoint the majority of the directors, and the second, control the management or policy decisions of another company. Now we shall look at how a holding company controls a subsidiary company based upon this definition. So let us assume that there is a subsidiary company. Now when there is an existence of a subsidiary company, as we noted that because this is a relative expression, so it exists in relation to another company which is a holding company. So subsidiary company becomes an offspring company and holding company becomes a parent company. Now a holding company exercises control over a subsidiary company based upon two dimensions. First, control over the composition of the board of directors, in which case it is considered as control over the management of the company, because board of directors, they are known as the managers of the company and responsible for most of its business decisions. You can refer to our earlier lecture on the features of a company, in which one of the core feature of a company is delegated management, which is separation of ownership with management. The other way by which a holding company can exercise control over a subsidiary company can be through control over majority of the voting power. Now, control over the composition of board of directors comes to a holding company with the power or a right to appoint or remove all or majority of the directors. So if the holding company can at will appoint the directors which it so chooses or desires, or once appointed it can remove all or majority of them, then we say that the holding company has got control over the board of directors or management of the subsidiary company. On the other hand, control of majority of the voting power comes through shares. So just to put it simply, if a holding company owns majority of shares in a subsidiary company, then it has majority over the voting power. So majority of the voting power essentially means control over the shares or shareholding of the subsidiary company. These kind of controls, whether control of management or control of ownership through voting power, in order to be a subsidiary company, any one of these two dimensions they have to be fulfilled, that is either the control over the management or the control over the voting power for a company to be a subsidiary company of a holding company. So it could be either control over the management, or it could be control over the voting power, or in the third scenario it could be a combination of both, that is a holding company has control over the management as well as ownership. Now, to further explain a subsidiary company, it is given in the explanation clause that a company shall be deemed to be a subsidiary company of the holding company even if the control is of another subsidiary company of the holding company. So the word deemed here is important and has a legal import. So deemed means it is a kind of a legal construction or a legal assumption that although such other company is a subsidiary company, but a subsidiary company of a holding company will also make the third company the subsidiary company of the holding company. Now, to explain this with the help of an example, supposing there is a company Y which is a holding company, and there is a company X which is a subsidiary company of holding company Y. Now Z is a subsidiary company of X. So in that case, Y will be deemed to be a holding company of company Z. So a subsidiary of another subsidiary company of a holding company will be deemed to be a subsidiary company of that other subsidiary company. So a slightly complicated concept, but which can be explained with the help of this example. Now we will look at the meaning of the word significant influence in the context of an associate company. So if there is an associate company, again as a relative expression, it is with reference to another company, and that another company exercises significant influence through the following ways. First, control of at least 20% of the voting power. This control over at least 20% of the voting power comes through ownership of shares. Second, participation in business decisions under an agreement. And third, a joint venture company. So there can be three modes of exercising influence over another company. These three modes are not to be taken cumulatively, meaning thereby, in order to be an associate company, any one of these three conditions have to be fulfilled. So it can be one or more. Minimum requirement is of any one of these three conditions. So it could be one, it could be a combination of two, or it could be all three. Now, this expression joint venture company has been just introduced to us. Now, let us look at the meaning of the expression joint venture. Now, this expression joint venture is defined under section 2, clause 6, subclause B of the Companies Act 2013. According to this provision, a joint venture means a joint arrangement whereby the parties that have joint control over the arrangement have rights to the net assets of the arrangement. So in simpler words, a joint venture is a combination of two or more parties, generally characterized by shared ownership, shared returns, sharing of risks, and sharing of governance. Now, this combination of two or more parties, it seeks the development of a single project for profit. So although they can be two different organizations, but they have a common objective or a common goal towards one or more projects, which is driven by profits. The parties to the joint venture must be at least a combination of two different persons. Now, companies, they typically pursue joint ventures for the following reasons. Firstly, to access a new market, particularly emerging markets. Here, one company has access to a market already and the other company does not. So, by entering into a joint venture, it gets access to the market to which its partner already has got access to. The second is to gain scale efficiencies by combining assets and operations, the power of collaboration, the power of multiple. Third is to share risk for major investments or projects. So obviously if there are multiple entities, then just as profits are shared or gains are shared, the risks, they are also shared. Fourthly, to access skill and capabilities. For example, and especially in cases of high-end technology transfers from one company to another company under an agreement. Now, to differentiate between a holding company and a subsidiary company. So, holding company is regarded as a controlling company, whereas a subsidiary company is regarded as a controlled company over which control is exercised by a holding company. The relationship can be juxtaposed as a parent and an offspring. So holding company is the dominant or parent company and subsidiary company is an offspring company. Now the purpose of formation of a holding company is that if there is a large conglomerate of businesses that are diversified, which are held by many companies. So one becomes a holding company which controls many of the subsidiaries which are into different businesses. And a subsidiary company is generally a specialized company with control or management over a specialized business in a particular area. So the example, we have a very well-known example of the Tata Group. So Tata Sons Limited is a holding company and it has many subsidiaries in specialized area like information technology, there is TCS. In automobiles, there is Tata Motors and we have Tata Steel in steel and minerals. Now to further differentiate between a subsidiary and an associate company. So a subsidiary company, a holding company fully controls it. But an associate company, another company has got only significant influence but not full control. So holding company controls more than 50% of the total voting power, whereas in an associate company, the another company controls between 20% to 50% of the total voting power. So if it exceeds 50%, an associate company becomes a subsidiary company. Or in other words, if the control in a subsidiary company comes to less than 50%, then it can become an associate company. So while another company has got some influence and say in an associate company, the associate company does maintain a higher degree of autonomy in its business decisions and operations as compared to a subsidiary company when it kind of concedes or gives most of its operational autonomy to a holding company. Now next kind of a classification we have, classification number 6, is on the basis of access to capital. Here we have two kinds of companies, listed company and unlisted company. A listed company is defined under Section 2, Subclause 52 of the Companies Act 2013. According to this provision, a listed company means a company which has any of its securities listed on any recognized stock exchange. So we know of a lot of stock exchange like NSE, National Stock Exchange, BSE, Bombay Stock Exchange. Stock exchange are essentially platforms for trading of securities like shares. So shares of a listed company, they are freely traded on a public stock exchange. Now listed companies are those companies that have met the stock exchange's listing requirements and have undergone a rigorous screening process before offering their shares to the public. Only a public company can be listed. A private company cannot be listed on a stock exchange. Now a public and a private company, what are these? We will be taking up in a later lecture for your reference. Now unlisted companies are those companies that are not traded on a stock exchange. So a company may not be listed on a stock exchange for a variety of reasons. For example, number one, not qualifying to be listed. So generally stock exchange, they have a listing requirement which a company should meet, higher compliance requirements, and so not every company is able to fulfill it. The other reason for an unlisted company is that it wants to avoid the cost that is associated with being listed. The third is that a company may not seek public investors, so it does not see the point of putting its shares on stock exchange. And fourthly, that there are very few shareholders for listing, because a public company gets the benefit of offering the shares on a stock exchange or being listed on a stock exchange, but it is not mandatory. It is only a benefit or a privilege. So access to capital, a listed company obviously gets a lot of advantage over an unlisted company, because as we know, the stock exchange is a very popular platform for investors to make their investment. So if a company is listed on that platform, then it is quite natural for it to have access to a lot of investors. So if a company is looking for a lot of external capital, especially through subscription of shares, then it is advised that it should meet the listing requirements of the stock exchange and get itself listed. So whether to get listed or not is a matter of discretion or a choice that the company has to make. While there are benefits of listing, it is not mandatory. So to summarize our discussion of this lecture, so we have classified the companies on the basis of control and access to capital, two very important classifications. On the basis of control, we have discussed a holding company, subsidiary company, and an associate company. What is the meaning of the word control in the context of holding and subsidiary company, and what is significant influence in the context of an associate company. We have further undertaken a comparison or differentiation, a nuanced comparison of subsidiary company and an associate company, which is very important to bear in mind. Then on the basis of access to capital, listed company and unlisted company, depending on whether they are listed on the stock exchange. With this, we come to an end of this lecture. We shall be continuing with our discussion on the various kinds of companies in the subsequent lectures. Thank you.